My name is Julie Pearson Little Thunder. Today is February 15th, 2011, and I'm interviewing Shan Goshorn as part of the Oklahoma Native Artist Project sponsored by Oklahoma State University and the Oral Histories Research Program at OSU. We're at Shan's house in Tulsa. Shan, you're an artist who works in a wide variety of media and who is especially concerned with issues of representation of Native peoples. You're Eastern Band Cherokee. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you.
I understand you were raised in Baltimore, Maryland. What was it like growing up there?
I grew up outside of Baltimore, but I attended school in Baltimore, but every summer my family and I would pack up and go to Cherokee, North Carolina. And as I got older, old enough to be of work age, my parents would leave me there for the summer and they would go back. And you know, both of my sisters had this experience too because it was just easier to find work there. And so we lived with my grandmother, and my parents have since moved back to Cherokee, so that's really home base now.
Were you born in Baltimore?
Yes.
What did your folks do for a living?
My mother was a registered nurse, but she became a homemaker when children came along. My father worked for the government. He was an electronics technician.
Is your Cherokee on both your mom and your dad's side?
My mother.
On your mother's side. Mm-hmm. And during some of those summers that you spent with your grandmother at Kuala, what were some of the things that you did?
My first job was working as a waitress. No, I take that back. My first job was 6 hours long. I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Oh.
Which seems ironic since now I'm a wildlife rehabilitator and I work with birds. It only lasted 6 hours. But after that I worked with the Kuala Arts and Crafts Mutual, which is a cooperative of all Cherokee people, Cherokee artisans and craftspeople, so that I became aware of Cherokee crafts that way, and I met a lot of our craftspeople and artists. I then started working with Indian Arts and Crafts Board, with the only field representative left outside of Washington, D.C., and I worked with him for several years.
And you were in your teens at this point still?
Okay. Yes, and so I did that through high school and college. I would go down there and work for the summers.
Wonderful. Was your grandmother a Cherokee speaker? What was your exposure to the language?
Yes, she was, but she didn't speak it very much. She was kind of the mindset that it wasn't a good thing anymore to speak Cherokee, but she would talk at my urging, and so I did pick up words. I'm not fluent by any means, but I do have an understanding of words and counting and, you know, food, that survival words.
Those basics. Were you involved with the Baltimore Indian community at all?
No.
No. What kinds of art experiences did you have in the public school?
I had a phenomenal art teacher in the 11th grade. I was, at my parents' urging, I was very involved with music up until that point. And it took a lot of convincing to convince them that I wanted to use up my one elective and drop orchestra and go into visual arts. But I had an incredible teacher in the 11th grade, and in 1 year he helped me get a portfolio together, so I was accepted into the Cleveland Institute of Art in Ohio.
That's very exciting. Did you have any extended family members who were artists?
No, I was the only one in my family. I mean, we didn't even have any basket makers or bead workers, but, you know, mostly, I feel like most Indian people are very artistic, so it was all around me, but it just wasn't in my immediate family.
And when you decided that you wanted to go to the Cleveland Art Institute, had you already sort of decided you were going to be an artist at that point too?
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes. In fact, growing up, I felt like I was really cheated because it's like, what do you mean you only get to pick one thing? Because I was really drawn to being a veterinarian or I really wanted to be an artist. There were a couple of other choices that kind of dropped off earlier. Yes, but I went to the Cleveland Institute of Art because their silversmithing department. It was one of the best in the country with John Paul Miller. And I took 2 years there and decided it just wasn't a good fit at that school because they didn't understand. I mean, they had no appreciation of Native American art. None.
So you weren't, it wasn't even something you could explore through jewelry. It was
Oh,
just
absolutely not. No, in fact, it was very difficult because you absolutely had to do things their way. In the silversmithing department, it was even more amplified. And I was being wooed by the photography department. They were trying to amp up their department a little bit, and I just couldn't believe how much faster it was. I thought everyone should know how to photograph their own work, and I took this photography course, and it's like, in silversmithing, you were like, ding, 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 ding for a year on one piece, you know? And in photography, you could go in and knock out 10, 15 in a day.
And did they have a different attitude towards Indian subject matter in that?
It was not valued at this school. I was the only Indian there at the time.
So was that the end of your higher education? Or did you?
Yeah, I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts. I went to school there, but I also went to school at the Atlanta College of Art, and I actually got my degree from the Atlanta College of Art, but I only went to school there for 1 year. I was in Cleveland for 3 years, and I went to a local university for a year, so I really felt like my affiliation was with the Cleveland Institute of Art.
Right. Who were some of your artistic influences, aside from your, exposure to the Eastern Man Cherokee artisans and artists?
Well, at the Cleveland Institute of Art, I discovered American Indian Art magazine, and every month, back cover, Elaine Horwich Gallery was Fritz Scholder, and I was just completely knocked out by him. And then I also became very interested in the work of T.C. Cannon. But, this was back before you could get online and research people, and so you just had to, if a book came out, I'd look at the same book 30, 40, 50 times, or if a magazine like American Indian Art came out, I would covet those and just go over them and over them and over them. And so I learned about a lot of people that ironically I started showing with when I moved out here. So that was very, very exciting for me.
At the Atlanta Institute of Art, had you kind of switched your focus to painting over there, or
no? I actually ended up with a double major in photography and painting. And at the Cleveland Institute of Art, the way they introduced hand tinting, which is probably what my work is most recognizable as hand-colored black and white photographs. He just brought in a box of Marshall photo oils, and he said, these are Marshall photo oils. You use them to hand-color black and white photographs. You apply them to the surface of your photograph, to a matte surface with cotton wool and Q-tips. I want to see 3 examples.
So was it partly your interest then in pursuing Indian subject matter that brought you to Oklahoma? How did you decide to make the move over here?
No, it was because I was living in Atlanta at the time, and I had just graduated from the Atlanta College of Art, and it was time to change. It was time for a move. It was sort of for self-preservation reasons, and I had a former roommate from Cleveland living out here, and she said, why don't you move out here, why don't you move out here, why don't you move out here, why don't you move out here? And so I decided on a Thursday and moved on a Monday.
Wow.
I mean, it was just quick. And it was a real shock when I moved here, but being in an intertribal environment has been fabulous. That's really been the best part of living here.
Did you live with your friend initially, or? And got introduced to some of the galleries right away, or was that a process?
I stumbled across Linda Griever's gallery, the Art Market, first thing, and met Ben Harjo, and he actually was my neighbor. He lived in the apartments right next door to where I was living, and so we spent a lot of time together, and he was real helpful with helping me navigate with other artists. And one of the first people that I met when I moved here was Kelly Haney, because as I talked to people, he was one of the people that I had looked at work in books, and oh my God, he was just, bigger than life. And they said, oh, Kelly, you should call Kelly. He's really a nice guy. And I'm like, call Kelly. And I did. And he's like, well, I think he said, well, that'd be fine, young lady. He says, why don't you meet me at the Thunderbird restaurant? We'll have lunch, because that's halfway between you and me going on to Oklahoma City. And so we met, and he said, bring some photos of your work. And I did. And he said, we've got this big show coming up that we're thinking of. It's called Red Earth. I think you should apply. And that's the first booth show that I ever did. It was the first year that Red Earth opened, and this is their 25th year this year.
That's wonderful. That's a neat story. So, in terms of artists those were painters, in terms of Indian artists who kind of shared your interest in multimedia work, did that come a little later?
Well, I was really interested in the work of Fritz Scholder and T.C. Cannon. They were big influences. But then once I started meeting Indian artists, I started working with Edgar Heap of Birds. He formed a group called Makers, and it was Edgar, Richard Ray Whitman, Patricia Mousetrail Russell, Joe Dale Tate Navacoy, and myself. And the premise was, as Indian people, it's not about creating artwork to hang on the wall, it's the process of making it and the ceremony involved in making it. And so that became more of a multimedia, interdimensional type of thought.
And what year was that? Do you remember approximately?
86 to 88, I think. Now, up till almost 90.
Okay.
So it was late 80s.
With regards to photographs, of course, there's this whole history of non-Indians photographing Native peoples in ways that didn't represent them or their cultures, truthfully. Was that one of your motivations in
Absolutely.
Taking photography?
Mm-hmm. I became part of this group in Canada called Native Indian Inuit Photographers Association, NIPA. And that was part of the premise of that group. We had images taken of us and from us for so long, and that was back when you could get a nice little Instamatic camera that it was affordable to take pictures, and so people were encouraging Indian people to take more photos, and I became part of that group, and it's no longer around like a lot of Indian groups, but it was really important during that 10-12 year period. I was on their board for a little bit.
Even though you've been very involved with the Indian community here and you're Indian in terms of photography or taking photographs, did you ever run into any resistance?
No, but I always tried to make sure that I had permission before I photographed
Right.
at a ceremony or at a wedding or at a United event. And that's in 1992, that was the big quincentennial, and NEPA actually spearheaded this. It was going to be a book, and then it was going to be an exhibit, and then it was going to be a collection of photos, and nothing ever really happened with it. But they were encouraging photographers to document that year. It was called A Year in the Life of Indian America, and then the title changed a bunch of times too. But that really helped me square in on making sure I had permission, slips signed, and model releases, and so I've been really good about trying to keep up with that and getting permission from people.
That was probably a great base that you kind of laid to in terms of photographs and photography work for you.
I have a lot of negatives.
And of course, another thing about photography is the way, it captures contemporary identity, and yet it just becomes this historical artifact like the minute it's taken.
Mm-hmm. And that was one thing that was really important to me, is that when I first started showing work, people were like, well, they would see burial scaffolding, and they're like, well, you mean Indians still are around? And I wanted these photographs to show that, that this is a contemporary part of life, that we are still here, and then I may paint things around it, but this has contemporary basis.
Great. As you mentioned, you're especially well known for your hand-tinted colorized photographs. What aside from being introduced to that in art school, what has sustained your interest in that process?
after 10 or 15 years, it was starting to feel like I was doing it by rote. You know, it just felt like it wasn't challenging enough. And so it was with the pregnancy of my daughter, who's now 14, that I upped the ante a little bit, because I was bedridden with her for the last 4 years, and I was doing a lot of political work. And my doctor even said, that strife will be here after your baby comes. Your job is to have a healthy baby now. And so I would stay in bed and I would look at my negatives, and I conceptualized this entire body of work. And as I lay in bed, I wanted to make it more challenging than just like, okay, I'm going to put yellow here and I'm going to put green here. And so I was visualizing double exposing all these images. And this is before Photoshop. This is before anything was digital, so it was all done in the darkroom. So I was figuring out how to do all this this layering in the darkroom. So they were double exposed, black and white photographs that were hand colored. And it was all about, it was going to a more nurturing place rather than the warrior and the militant place. It was more of a place of paying homage to our original mother, to the earth. And so it was all about remembering our traditional teachings to help me carry this baby to term.
So you were actually working it out in your head, though. You weren't doing it.
Yeah, no, I wasn't in the darkroom at all.
In the darkroom.
I was making notes all over my contact sheets and making little studies, and you know, it's just, you know, rest for 4 months. Are you nuts? You know?
Especially for an artist. I think another vein of work that you're well known for involves photographing commercial products that, you know, use stereotypes to promote their brands. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how you got the idea for some of those series?
It was when I was doing work with Richard and Edgar, and Amnesty International was coming to town, and they wanted to do some work to show how Indian people were still being stereotyped against. And Edgar had heard me talking about this, and this was kind of a new idea for me. I didn't grow up in a family that was aware of this. Like a lot of America, it was kind of under our radar. And when I did have that aha moment, hey, wait a minute, you know, it's just like Red Man smokeless tobacco. That's the largest selling smokeless tobacco in our smoke shops, because Indian people go in and they say, that's an Indian, this brand is for me. You know, we get caught up in that commercialization just like everybody else does. And so when I finally had that aha moment that this is not right, that this continues to perpetuate us as cartoon characters and dehumanize us, that's when I started doing this work. And Edgar had heard me kind of working through some of this, because Edgar and Richard really challenged me to start thinking politically and to make some statements with my work. He said, why don't you do something for this show? This show's coming up. Why don't you work something up? And I'm like, okay. So I'll go to the grocery store and maybe I'll find 5 or 10 things, you know, around me. And in the grocery store alone, I just told my kid, I said, anything you see with an Indian on it, bring it back and put it in this basket. I mean, we were piling stuff in there. And it was a huge awakening for me, just to become aware of how insidious this was, and just to become aware. I mean, I ended up I just showed that exhibit for the first time in years out at Western Carolina, and I think I had 250 actual items of, you know, and I'm not talking about cigar store Indian stuff that's old. I'm talking about stuff that was being produced. Now, some of that stuff is not being produced now, but at the time that I collected it, it was all being consumed.
Right.
And no sooner would you get one thing taken off the shelf, 5 more would replace it.
So this show in North Carolina, you're saying, was a relatively recent show. But
yes, it was last fall,
in which
2010.
2010.
Mm-hmm. But to counter that, because I would do a lot of lecturing, I would do a lot of talks to school groups and such, and a lot of times I'd have people, you know, that had to be there, and they'd be sitting there just wrapped up with barbed wire about. And then sometimes I'd have a really enlightened group that would say, okay, we get it, but with what do we replace these images? And that's when I started doing Reclaiming Cultural Ownership, Challenging Indian Stereotypes, which is the only documentary style photography that I've ever done, and that was just images of Indian people by an Indian person, and just knowing Indian people enough that I could get into their lives and watch them, in all Indian board of directors, or a Native American television show, or people playing a game of Indian dice, just gathering supplies, just to show who we really are.
So you were able to kind of have a visual, that impetus arose out of your desire to respond to that.
Yes, it was a counterpoint.
Yes.
Yes. No, not this, but this is who we are. This is who we are.
There's a more recent series, I think, with the double exposed photographs and colorized photographs, but it focuses on images in which the people and landscape elements are merged. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your ideas for that particular series.
Well, that really was what spawned out of my pregnancy. It was showing our relationship to the Earth Mother, and just showing she cares for us, and in return, that's what our ceremonies and our dances are all about. It's about renewal of the earth and hence ourselves.
Right, and I think it's really interesting too that women artists are really Indian women artists, I think, are really focusing in on those particular relationships, and especially now at this point in their lives, it's emerging, and I'm seeing it in a lot of people's work.
Well, I was just talking to Louis Gray, who's really outspoken about Indian rights and the inappropriate use of mascots to represent Indian people. And the thing I admire so much about his approach is he's just so kind and gentle, and I see that that's becoming more of the way that I'm approaching. I'm less in your face with, you really ought to believe this, and you don't have the right, I'm doing less of that. I just don't have time for that anymore. I have a message, and if people want to hear it, fine. If they don't, fine. I just don't have time to be in their face anymore.
Your work's been shown in France, in China, and South Africa, among other places. Did you travel to some of those places with your work?
No.
I know.
I'm going to Italy in May, and we're trying to work out the logistics to have a show on there.
You've also worked as an artist in the schools for over 20 years. Do you still do that?
No.
During the time that you did, what art media did you teach?
We would do collaborative. There wasn't one thing that I did. There were a lot of different projects I did. I did storytelling, and the school would collectively illustrate stories. So it was classes of children would come in and contribute to these paintings. There's a lot of organizing there, and a lot of projects showing them simple basket weaves and equating that to math. Self-portrait projects to create yourself in a positive way.
And you sort of had to propose. Did you do proposals for different projects, I imagine, right? How do you think teaching impacted your art during that period?
It taught me to appreciate my own time in my own studio a lot. And it wasn't that I didn't enjoy children, but you have nothing left at the end of the day. Nothing. It's an exhausting job. And I was much younger then, but it was just exhausting.
I know that corporate commissions or commissions from businesses are part of your income. Do you have to kind of eschew art with a message in those cases, or how do you approach sort of workplace art?
Luckily, I feel confident as an artist now to not feel like I have to do work that the client likes that I don't like. The work is always something that I like, and today I think all the clients are thrilled with their work. I mean, that's to my knowledge that everyone's happy, but I've reached the point in my career that they're hiring me because they like my work, so they have to have the confidence that I'm going to produce something good for them. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do when I create work in a corporate setting is to create a space where people can take a deep breath, just so that they can quit their working on the computer or talking on the phone or crunching numbers or just all that crazy stuff that goes on in corporate America. And I had a job briefly in corporate America, and it kind of like Kentucky Fried Chicken. It was very brief. But I know that you need a space where you can go in and you can just get grounded. Mm-hmm. And even if it's an abstract piece, I'm not talking like it has to always be the grass piece, which is something that I have been doing. But even abstract pieces, I think, challenge us in a different way. It stimulates a different part of the brain, so that I think people are more productive at thinking. And we're moving away from just doing jobs. We have to move into creatively learning how to do these jobs, because jobs can be outsourced to computers now. You have to be a creative thinker so you can figure out what you want the computers to learn to do. So I think a good workspace creates that kind of atmosphere, and I'm a big believer in abstract work around us. I think it really encourages us to be more than we know that we are.
It's mentally stimulating as well. You're filling in part of the painting. So are they primarily paintings that you have gone to the workplace, or has it been a mix of media?
Photography and paintings, and digital technology has revolutionized the way that I work, because as soon as I found someone that could print photographs on canvas, so yes, I could hand color these canvases, you don't have to worry about framing it. All of a sudden they got really big. I was doing pieces that were 9 feet tall for this one client. I did a piece that's up in Bartlesville. It's 12 feet long. Wow. So it's just, it revolutionized it for me. It completely changed the way that I work.
You've had over 20 solo exhibitions of your work. What's one that really stood out for you?
There's not one, but the year that I was pregnant with my first child, I had 8 solo shows. So that year just kind of blurred them all together, It was just, people were packing up work and sending it directly to the next place. I just kept wondering what this work was going to look like when it came home.
I was going to say, because you weren't packing it up, and it was work that was already done, apparently. But wow. Have you done any installations?
No, but I'd like to. Every time I go to an installation show, I think, why is all my work flat on the wall? But then I think, man, you got to store all that stuff. Just storing paintings is such a challenge. Just, unless you count the installations I do with the stereotypical work. But I have some ideas for installations that I think would be a lot of fun, and I think they'd be good shows, but I'm just not ready to go there yet.
How about collaborations with other artists? Have you done any of that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's an artist from Cherokee, North Carolina that does wood sculpture, and we did a collaboration where he would carve these abstract forms and I would paint them, and then I would put beads on them. They were wonderful. One was real tall and blue, and he let me name them and everything. He just said, here you go. And so I called it Longman, which is what we call our river. And it was painted, to show the current, the undulation, and the twinkle, and the beads. And the other one was shorter, and it looked like a real tall lotus but I called that one Eternal Flame because we carried the flame from North Carolina to Oklahoma, and then they carried it back. And so that one was painted in coppers and golds and reds.
That sounds neat.
But really, any corporate installation, I feel, is a collaboration. Because when the Tunica Biloxi invited me to come and do work for their casino, they said, okay, well, we'd like to fly you in. I'm like, fly me in? Just send me something to work from. Because they wanted to fly me in so I could be inspired. I'm like, well, that really rocks, but just send me something. They said, we really can't. And the reason they couldn't was because the Tunicas and the Biloxi came together because they were such small tribes. But their tribe was the catalyst for NAGPRA, because there was an entire mound that they didn't even know about, as contemporaries, that this amateur archaeologist was selling off piece by piece, and they managed to use that as the example of an entire culture that would be dissipated because of this man's, gold digging or whatever. And so that's how the decision was made that it would become illegal to dig up these Indian graves. And so they had decided as a tribe that their pieces would never leave again. And so they actually did let me come down and go through some of the pottery shards and go through the beads that they found. And I came up with ideas of pieces to put in their casino based on their pottery. So it's very much a collaboration when I work with corporations or companies like that.
Definitely. Is casino work still kind of an important vein for you?
I never thought it was going to be important. I never thought it would, but my tribe commissioned me twice. I thought, wow, that's a good gig. And then Cherokee Nation asked me to do a piece, and I thought, well, guess that gig's up. Got, the two Cherokees, there's the Gadua band, but their casino I didn't think was hiring artists, so well, guess that's done. But then the Tunica Biloxi hired me to do that, and then I did some work for the Quapaws.
So for the Tunicas, I see that's been fairly recent, within the last...
Oh, it's been within the last 6 or 7 years, I think. But the Quapaws was a couple years ago.
Great. You've done some book illustrations, and one of them was for a book of Cherokee stories. What were these paintings that you used as illustrations? What was that process like?
Just like every other deadline process. They contacted me for the cover, which was going to be a photograph of my grandmother, and she actually modeled for me, and she was telling these stories. And then I was painting everything around it for the cover. And they had talked to another Eastern Cherokee to do the interior. There were 14 interior black and white illustrations. And he was going to get some studies, and it was all coming together, and it was all coming together, and it was all coming together, and it was, I said, you haven't seen any of the work for the inside yet? I said, don't you be coming to me in the last hour and ask me to do this. That's exactly what happened. I did all 14 interior black and white painting. They were like just washes. I mean,
wow.
In 13 days.
That's amazing.
It was insane.
Not a process you want to repeat, probably. You're a member of Urban Indian 5. Can you tell me when that group was started and what its purpose?
Let's see. I think it was started in 06 or 07, but I wasn't one of the initial 5. One of the artists, it just wasn't a good fit for her, and so they pulled me in. And then since then, let's see, it's Brent Greenwood, who's Ponca, Tom Pula, Kiowa, Gerald Conoyer, who's Lakota, Holly, Holly Wilson, she's Cherokee, Delaware, and me. So Holly came in, another member had to leave because he had some, he was going to be a single dad while his wife went off to get her PhD. And so he felt like he had to pull back for a while, and so Holly came in. But it was an original collaboration between 5 artists and the Oklahoma City Indian Clinic. And so the intention was the artists were going to be deliberately creating artwork with the intention of inspiring wellness. And so we were going to be putting work up to inspire people in the clinic to remember, indigenous memories, tribal memories, of what we know about healing ourselves, of what we know about healing ourselves spiritually. So part of what we're doing is addressing historical trauma, which keeps us in a very ailed state. And we're kind of looking at the traditional use of the word disease. It's dis-ease, where we're out of relationship, out of harmony, where we're not grounded, where we're not balanced, and so we're open and vulnerable for deterioration in our body. And so it's not like the work is, it's not like it's obviously about health. I mean, it's not using the icons that you might know in the white medical society, but it's about using icons that Indian people know have importance.
And are you rotating works, or have they? I haven't.
Well, it's we have had work at the clinic. We have shown work at the Health Science Center at OU. We had a show at the Southern Plains Indian Museum in Anadarko. We have had some smaller shows, but the smaller shows weren't what our goal is right now is to get 2 pieces from each person, and even if it's a high quality reproduction, and have several sets of these 10 images, and we want to travel them through Indian clinics.
That would be neat.
Yeah, we want to remind people of the power that we have from within to heal ourselves.
You won first place at Grand Award, I guess, at Red Earth with a conceptual piece, a basket. Let's talk about your baskets a bit, because these have been pretty important in your work.
I feel like they have been important, but it's just kind of comical how they became, how they even happened.
Let's talk about maybe the first one and how you got the idea for.
When I was working with the Indian Arts and Crafts Board back when I was a teenager, one of the things that they commissioned me to do on the side when I wasn't even in the office, they just commissioned me to do this on this, not on the slide, but just on the side. They commissioned me to do 21 black and white pen and ink illustrations of traditional Cherokee basket designs. And by the time I got to like number 16 or number 17 or number 18, I'm thinking, I bet I could do this. Because it's math, it's about patterns, it's about seeing the patterns in something. And my family was all like, no, you couldn't. And I'm like, no, really, I think I could. No, you really couldn't. I really think I could. And so it wasn't then, but it was later that I had this idea for a basket. And I know the process of gathering white oak or cane or honeysuckle. I know this process. I have photographed people doing it. That's quite a bit of what we were doing at the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, was promoting these kind of crafts. But I didn't want to do that. There were people that were doing it way better than me. I wanted to do something different, and I just got this idea to weave baskets out of paper. And not just paper, but paper that had been digitally printed with reproductions of treaties. And so I contacted Cherokee Nation. I said, what is the most difficult treaty? And they're like, oh, hands down, tobacco compact. And I'm like, why? And they said, oh, it's been in arbitration. It's been under the 2 different chiefs have been in there, trying to negotiate on it. It was under Wilma Mankiller and under Chad Smith. And it's in arbitration again. It's been resettled 2 or 3 times. And no sooner do they sign it, they think the other person has the unfair advantage, and they're in arbitration again. So I'm thinking, all right.
And this is a compact that allows. You want to explain real quickly?
Oh, it's a it's a contract between the state of Oklahoma and Cherokee Nation. And this is because of the smoke shops. You know, the smoke, if you're on Indian land, you can sell tobacco without the tax. That's what it is. So I got a copy of the tobacco compact, and I had my friend that does the high quality reproductions to print them on watercolor paper. And I cut them into splints and I wove them into a basket, and I used the traditional pattern called spider's web because I wanted to show how tangled
what a great metaphor.
And I had never woven a basket, so I wasn't real sure about how to finish it off. And then I thought, finish it off? What am I talking about? This is ongoing. And so I deliberately left it unfinished. And that piece is in the National Museum of the American Indian now. The Smithsonian bought that. And then I did another version of that, which is in the Kaiser collection here in Oklahoma. And I thought, okay, so done with that piece. And then I thought, and so whenever people would see it, Eastern Cherokees are like, oh yeah, well okay, so you can do that, but you could never do a double weave. And I'm like, well, why not? People are doing the double weave. Why couldn't I figure that out? And so I taught myself how to do a double weave. And I actually learned here in the studio, and my dad's very ill in North Carolina, so I would go back and forth every 60 days, and I would pack this basket up, and when I would sit there with him, I would work on this double weave. And the way I did it was, you know, you hear stories of, I learned at my mother's feet, you know, all these little clippings would fall down there, and I just learned how to do it. Well, my mother doesn't make baskets, and so I would have one hand on the finished piece, and I would count, and I would figure out, okay, I'm right here. And then I'd get on the piece I was working on, I would count, and I would count, and I would count, and I would say, okay, here I am. I need to go under 4 and turn left. So this hand would run over here and try to help this hand learn how to do it. And so I'd go as far as I could, and then we'd start over again. I would go back over here and count where I was and just keep going. But that basket was so difficult because it was start on the inside. You weave it up as high as you want it, and then you turn the splints and weave down and finish on the bottom. And this one was also woven out of paper, but this one had a different message. This one was, let me think what this one was. It was called Sealed Fate. Oh, it was the Treaty of New Echota, which a handful of Cherokee men signed under the cover of darkness, which supposedly gave the United States government the authority to remove all the Cherokees to Oklahoma. And so that's on the outside. But on the inside, I got a copy of the over 95 pages, which is between 12 and 15,000 signatures by Cherokee people that these men did not have the right to represent them, that this was an invalid document. And the interesting thing about that protest document is it was on sheets of paper that were roughly 8.5 by 11, but they were stitched together like this. And so it was this long roll when it was all done. And on the inside of this basket, it's actually kind of a buff color, but there were also some pages on this document that were this pale blue. I don't know why. You know, I don't know where these pale blue papers came from, but you know, they were the papers that people were signing on. So they would just have all these columns of signatures. Sometimes they were in the Cherokee syllabary, and sometimes they were in the English translation of the Cherokee name. So that's on the inside, and I did a lid, same thing, Treaty of New Echota on the outside and the protest document on the inside. But then on the top, I wove a traditional Cherokee pattern called Man in the Coffin. And I made that all out of Andrew Jackson's signature because he absolutely refused to even view the document. And this is one of the few documents that actually went to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you know what? You're out of line, Jackson. This is an invalid document. And Jackson said, watch me. I'm removing them. And this was really unfortunate on his part because at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, the Cherokees saved his life. And so this is a fine way to repay the Cherokees.
Right. What an amazing piece. Did you see the original protest document where
Mm-hmm.
At the Smithsonian or?
No, I saw them in Tahlequah.
In Tahlequah, okay.
They had them on exhibit.
Had them, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to just add that the shape of the basket too is this coffin-like
Well,
shape.
see, now I didn't know that. I didn't.
That wasn't intentional.
Well,
or
no, it was just. In fact, see, that's the basket that I was modeling it from. That center one up there.
Yeah.
And when I took it finished back to Cherokee, I showed it to the museum, and they said, "Wow, looks like we're going to have to be 14." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, we currently recognize 13 living people as being able to do this basket, and now we've added you as the 14th. And I was showing it to one of the premier basket makers, and she said, first of all, she approved, which just thrilled me, you know. She really approved of it. And she said, this shape is called a coffin shape, and she said that this was the hardest shape to make, and it was considered sacred. I don't know, either nobody knows or nobody will tell me, I don't know which, but I don't know whether it carried sacred regalia or sacred herbs. I don't know what its sacred use was.
What a compliment.
But that piece was purchased by the Gilcrease, so it will stay here in Tulsa, which thrills me no end.
Yes. Is it on display right now? Is it
No,
okay.
No, but I don't know what the plans are.
We
when
need
it will
to start pursuing that. The Eastern Band Cherokee gave you an honorarium in 1992 for your truthful representation of Cherokee people back east. How did that affect you?
It validated the work I was doing.
I understand your husband built you a new. Well, your husband has built some aspects of this house, but you too had a studio built for you. And
I built
what does that mean to you? I
have saved my money for 20 years, and I built this studio.
Okay, great. With money from art.
That's right.
That's very satisfying.
That's right.
And you like it because it's...
Well, prior to working here, I was working in the smallest bedroom in the house. And the thing that pushed me right over the edge was when I was doing those pieces that were 9 feet tall, but they wouldn't fit in my studio. They were at a slant, and no matter which side of that slant I was on, the phone would be on the other side, which would ring. And so I ended up working with Linda Pearson, sorry. Linda Pearson with at Boston Avenue Frame on Cherry Street. Yeah. And she let me set up in her lobby and work on these pieces.
Wow.
It's like, great, you can hang little flags out and sell popcorn. We're all set.
Yes.
So I got to work down there, and we've been trying to decide for years, do we build over the garage? Do I rent a place somewhere else? But it's really important for me to have it here in my house because I've raised my kids. I'm here after school when they get here. I can start dinner. You know, it's just, I can be an integral part of the house, and I can work really, really late and not worry about having to get home. I am home.
It's your space, yes. Wildlife rehabilitation has become an important part of your life. Can you just talk about when you first became involved with rehabilitation?
As a child, you know, we were one of those people, we were one of those families that when we would find birds, we would try to take care of them. And I actually had amazing success because as an adult and as having my federal license now, I know how hard it is. It was just lucky that we got so many of them to fly away. It really was just lucky. But I'm averaging, I had over 100 birds last year, but I didn't have so many that, you know, the year before I had over 100 birds, but last year with all the travel I was doing in North Carolina, I had maybe 80, I think. But it's a huge, huge, huge time commitment. It's so hard to keep up with baby birds' feeding schedules because they need to eat every 20, 30 minutes. When the sun's shining, you're putting food in mouth, you know?
And obviously, yes, as you say, it just takes a lot of love and care and time.
But you know,
does
the
it
thing
feed your art?
Yes, yes, that's just exactly where I was going with this. The thing that was so interesting to me about this, because remember, I wanted to be a vet too. You know, so here I get to do both things. My aviary is right outside this door. But it is so rewarding to me to see the personality of different species of birds and to have it validate the stories that tribal people tell about birds. You know, about the way that different birds have a part to play in legends or in the way that you make decisions, or that's the best part of it for me, you know. And it's also a really important part of giving back to the earth. You know, we've taken so much from our environment. It kind of ties in with what I'm doing with Urban Indian 5. You know, it's all about keeping ourselves well and finding our balance and becoming part of that hoop of life instead of just thinking that we're at the top of the pyramid all the time. You know, it's all about being united and being in harmony.
In terms of your colorized photos now, what kinds of paper and paints or markers do you use, or does it depend on the project?
Well, at one time, when I was printing my own work, it was easy to be able to answer that question. But now, you know, with inks and dyes changing so much, because I have completely folded up my darkroom and I pay a lab downtown. It's a darkroom process, but it's not on the art. It's not on the fiber paper that I liked so much. It's just, you know, then moving into tin and canvas. It's just, nobody really knows how this is all going to do.
Right.
We're just all kind of winging it as we go along. And you can do research as far as how archival the paint is, but I'm using Marshall Photo Oils, which is older than color photography. And I have used acrylic paint. I have used pastel. I have used pencil on them, but it doesn't work on the papers now.
Gotcha.
But I'm using glitter now.
That's and we are going to look at one of those pieces here pretty soon. How much of your overall production then consists of paintings, and how much are photographs, do you think? Is it about? Depends.
I don't know. I tell you, I wish I had a secretary so much of it wasn't office work. That's what just eats up my time in the studio.
And also, I think particularly when you're doing conceptual art, you're having to write grants and sometimes or apply for things. Is that time?
I haven't.
Okay.
I could. I mean, I need to. I'd like to, just to keep things moving slowly in here, you know, just so I can keep working. But when I sold that basket to Gilcrease, it was the greatest thing, because it meant that this winter I could work on projects I had always wanted to work on, but I finally had a little bit of financial freedom that I didn't have to worry about. I didn't have to worry about finding the next gig, you know, and that was such a huge relief.
It bought you a little chunk of time.
Bought me some time.
That's
yeah.
Wonderful.
But you know, with the conceptual work, so much of it's just thinking. It took me 2 months just to wrap my head around how to do these corners. You know, on that basket, I just couldn't figure out how I was going to start on the pocket and go.
Right. Well, what is your creative process, starting with how you get your ideas?
I am always thinking. I'm not kidding. I am always thinking. And if it's a really important idea, I'll make a note of it and sketch out some ideas. Or if I see something that I think would really inspire, I've got a whole file of ideas and sketchbooks with ideas. But sometimes it's a deadline.
And so the kinds of research that you do for photographs or paintings?
Well, the basket that I am researching right now is about boarding schools. And so I have had to find books that are, I got some books, TU Law Library, the Indian Law Library loaned me some books, and I have been in touch with the Carlisle Institute, and just, the computer has made it so much easier. It's just so much easier to use. I mean, it used to be you'd have to go to the library and borrow books on their intergalactic loan system, you know.
Right. What is your creative routine?
We had 2 weeks of snow days, and it was a slice of heaven. because ideally I like to work until 1, 2, 2:30 in the morning. I love that. I love being in here all by myself with the music playing and working. I love that. There's no phone calls. I don't have to worry about email. And then I like to sleep until 9:30. You know, that is a slice of heaven for me. But, you know, we still have one child left at home, and now that my husband's retired, he's good about getting her up in the morning. But, you know, you have to get up by 7:30 just to just so you're not like sleeping till noon. Because by the time you work out and stuff, and so usually I start working in the late afternoon, and then I work after dinner. That's really my best time to work.
What, looking back on your journey so far, what do you think was kind of a pivotal fork in the road moment for you?
I had a really challenging time in the mid-'80s, right after my husband and I got married. And I did a series of work called Coming into Power, which we had made into posters, which was about spiritual awakening, that had a statement that went with it. And it taught me to work in series. It taught me about really putting more into work than just, you know, being happy with a finished image. And it taught me about the impact that it had in other people's lives. I still have people coming back to me and saying, I have this work in my home, in my office, or, you know, I ran across this, and it was really powerful for me.
Yeah.
And so that's very rewarding that my work can have an impact on someone like that. But it was also a pivotal piece that kind of got me some awareness as far as in galleries being recognized as part of the Native American Indian movement.
Right, I remember that series. And the advantage of series, which you mentioned, is to allow you to do what?
To really work through an idea. So it was a piece of artwork that I didn't ever expect to show it when I first did it. It was really about catharsis for myself. It was about clearing out, you know, some of the negativity that was really just consuming us. It was something my husband and I were going through together. And it was allowing myself to be receptive to, you know, to the positiveness of the universe. And so it was, people would come over and see what I was working on, and they were really inspired and really encouraging. So that's really why it became a piece that I agreed to exhibit.
What was one of the high points, and you may have already mentioned it, maybe with regards to your basket, but I don't know, what would you pick? As I know there have been many high points, but a high point of your career.
Selling something to the Smithsonian. I'm going to back up one time. I got a call from the Smithsonian, and they wanted to use one of my images for a Native American women's music festival. It was the weekend before 4th of July and the weekend after 4th of July, and they were calling. They had all these women from North America, from all different tribes coming, and they used an image of mine on the CD cover. I'm like, wow, that really rocks. That is cool. And then the more I began to hear about it, the more I kept thinking, man, I wish I could go up there. That sounded like a lot of fun. So they called me back and they said, we'd like to negotiate the rights to use this for more, to promote it. And I'm like, you know what? If you can get me up there for the weekend, you can use it however you want to for this event. And so they fly me up there. This is the Smithsonian. They fly me up there, and I get off the plane, and this guy has a sign that says Smithsonian Institution, Ms. Goshorn. So I get there, and on the main mall, there's my image on banners all up and down the main mall, and I'm thinking, I can just die now.
That is an amazing moment. That is an amazing moment. How about one of the low points?
With my art? None come to mind. Yes. All that doing away with negativity works.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we didn't cover, or anything you'd like to add? Well, we're going to look at your paintings here in a minute, your work.
Yes, there is. I am recognized as a Native American photographer, but I have never, ever thought of myself really as a photographer. I think of myself as an artist, and so when people are surprised to see how many different media that I work in, they're like, oh, I didn't know you did this. You know, it's like, I would encourage young artists especially, don't get caught up in the medium. You know, your ideas are so much more important in the medium you're working with. Your ideas, you're going to find the medium to work in, and as long as you have that brain, eye, hand coordination together, you can do anything. You know,
which reminds me of your beautiful necklace that you showed me before this interview began, because you definitely can work in any medium.
But that's my point, you know,
right.
Whether it's beadwork or leather or whatever, once you are established as an artist and you have the ability to make your ideas come out of your hands, you know, there's just the learning curve is much shorter for each project.
Excellent. Well, now we're going to take a look at some of Shan Goshorn's work. All right. You want to talk about this piece?
Okay. Last fall, I flew into the Atlanta airport and I saw these big black and white photographs that were tinted with glitter, and they just knocked me out. They were artsy craftsy sort of, but they were just so fun. I like twinkle. I just like all that. And I like the idea of pushing the photograph a little bit further, but I really like the idea of applying it to a native person because of all the glitz with our casinos. You know, I like showing the tradition, but all the flash of the casino, you know, all the glitter and all the sparkle. And I started asking people when I was home this last trip in January, I said, so do you think that the casinos contributed to the revival of our culture? Because we've had a huge renaissance. Even though the artists in Atlanta used Southern icons, I immediately saw that I wanted to use traditional Indian people in their traditional clothing, because I wanted to play up that dichotomy of the casinos, of, you know, the sparkle and glitter of the casino and all the, you know, schmancy that goes on in the glitter. But when I was home this last January, I started asking people, do you think that the casinos have contributed to the renaissance of Cherokee language and clothing that's been going on? And interestingly enough, people felt very strongly, but they felt both ways. Some people said yes, because it's opened up the fact that we have this historical preservation going on. We have an entire allotment of money that goes into historical preservation. A lot of people said, oh no, I don't think so at all. So it's not that this actually has a true statement on my part. This is more about evoking dialogue, so that, you know, people can compare those two, the dichotomy of the casino and the traditions.
Right, right. Great.
But I like the idea of tinting with something besides a transparent paint. I really like that a lot. Okay, this is from a series called Industrial Trade Blankets, and this was actually inspired from a commission that I did with corporate headquarters here in town. They had a Western motif, and when they brought me in to talk, they had all these pictures of cows being steered and cows being roped and cows being herded and cows stampeding, and I thought, oh my God, what am I doing at this table? And I said, your building is just beautiful, but if you want cows in here, it was for a barbecue place. I can help you find another artist. I said, but you know what? You have such a beautiful building, and you have such an interesting marriage between natural elements and industrial elements. Why don't you let me do some studies, and I'll hand back to you on Monday, and if you don't like them, it doesn't cost you anything, and if you like them, then we'll negotiate. And so I was interested in introducing that idea of including industrial elements into the pieces, and these are of course inspired by the trade blankets.
Right.
But instead of elk's teeth or instead of shells, I added this element of the copper washers. And then this is something else I really like about art, is finding out the tradition Cherokee tradition of copper. Copper was really, really important to the Cherokees. They actually attributed the color, this rose color, to the sun, because they attributed, instead of the bright shiny yellow that you see in Anglo, they would see it when it first came up off the horizon, when it was at its most important part, not at the, the zenith for the Cherokee was not going straight up. It was when it's right at the horizon line. And the healing elements of copper too were really important. In fact, now they're showing that copper has true medicinal properties, and they're talking about putting copper in all the places where people touch all the time in hospitals to help. It's got bacterial properties.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, in ancient times in Rome, the soldiers that would suffer bad cuts, they would scrape some of the sword off into the wound, because the wound had copper, the sword had copper alloy in it, and they realized that if you were struck with a copper sword, it didn't fester the way it did with other swords.
Amazing. Okay, and we are going to look at a couple of photographs next.
Okay, this is a straight digital photograph, no manipulation. It's called Indian car. It's kind of a play on words with, you're always talking about an Indian car on the reservation, how it's always falling apart and stuff. But these guys I was tagging along. These are the warriors of the Anigidua, which is our first line of defense traditionally with the Cherokees. And I was tagging along on this photo shoot for National Geographic, and it just cracked me up to see these guys in the car. And it was totally impromptu. It wasn't staged. I just said, hey, you guys, roll down the window, look over here. And it was just perfect. But they went into a hotel room to change, and one guy walked out to get one of his sticks, his weapons. And as he walked out, there was this other couple coming in to check into the hotel, and they just watched him go to his car, and they looked at each other, and they went back to their car, and they left.
Oh my
goodness! This is from the Earth Renewal series. This is a series I was talking about that I conceived when I was pregnant. But this is a new way to do it, because this is one of the few that I've done digitally now. And so it was a digital combination. It was digitally done in Photoshop, but I'm still hand coloring it with the transparent photo oils. But this piece is called Earth Renewal, Gidua Motherland, because this is the Gidua Mound. This is the birthplace of all Cherokee. This is our ancestral origin land. This is the place where the Creator put us on the earth. It's one of the most important. This is a sacred Mecca. This is the place. This is a woman dressed in her traditional clothing. She's one of our few speakers that grew up speaking the native language. But this piece was done last year as a result of Duke Power planning to build a substation up here on the mountain. And nobody knew about it until they actually started opening up the earth, and there was this big red gash in the mountain. And so when we found out what they were doing, I was really, really proud of my tribe, because there was this big grassroots effort where people got really involved to stop it. And we were successful. The chief got behind it, and he actually got into negotiations with Duke Power, and they traded them for some land somewhere else. And so now the goal is to buy up all the land in the mountains all around it. So, because not only was it visibly ugly, but all that electrical energy going over that site, it's just not good. So I actually did another piece, which I donated the rights to use the image to the legal fund to raise money to help promote that effort.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Shan,
Gosh.
thank you so much for your time today.